The sun never set on the British Empire. This phrase, often repeated with a sense of pride, was a stark reminder of the Empire's vast reach across the globe. From the bustling streets of London to the remote villages in Africa and Asia, the British flag flew high, symbolizing control and dominance. But behind this grandeur lay a darker reality, one built on exploitation and suffering. This was not a testament to its vastness, but a chilling reminder of its insatiable hunger. The British Empire's expansion was driven by a relentless quest for resources and power. Every new territory conquered meant more wealth flowing into the coffers of the British elite, often at the expense of the local populations. The stern faces of British officers and the rigid formations of their troops were symbols of an empire that would stop at nothing to maintain its grip. The local populations, whether in India, Africa or the Caribbean, were subjected to harsh control measures, ensuring that any resistance was swiftly and brutally crushed. From the fertile plains of India to the mineral-rich heart of Africa, the British Empire extracted vast amounts of resources. Indian farmers were often forced to grow cash crops like indigo and opium instead of food, leading to widespread famine. In Africa, miners toiled in dangerous conditions, extracting gold, diamonds and other precious minerals that fueled the British economy. The British Empire was not built on trade or cooperation. The bustling ports and administrative offices were centres of exploitation. Goods were shipped out of the colonies, leaving behind impoverished communities. The wealth generated from these resources rarely benefited the local populations. Instead, it enriched the British elite and funded further expansion. It was built on bones, the bones of millions who starved, were enslaved, or were simply in the way of British ambition. Famines in India, often exacerbated by British policies, claimed millions of lives. In Africa, the slave trade tore apart communities, with countless individuals sold into bondage and shipped across the Atlantic. How did a nation, often lauded for its sense of fair play, manage to inflict such suffering on a scale that still boggles the mind? The British Parliament, with its debates and decisions, played a crucial role in shaping colonial policies. These policies, often justified under the guise of bringing civilization to the uncivilized, masked the true intent of exploitation and control. And why did the world stand by, seemingly unmoved by the cries of the colonized? Indifference and complicity were widespread. Many British citizens, shielded from the harsh realities of colonial rule, remained unaware or indifferent to the suffering. Global leaders, often benefiting from the status quo, turned a blind eye to the atrocities. The answer lies in a carefully constructed web of economic exploitation, political maneuvering, and outright brutality. The British Empire's success was built on a foundation of systemic oppression. Economic policies ensured that colonies remained dependent on British goods and services, while political strategies kept local leaders in check. The British Empire's rise was not a story of benevolent paternalism. The cold expressions of British officials and the orders they issued were indicative of an empire that prioritized profit over people. The narrative of bringing progress and development to the colonies was a facade, hiding the true nature of exploitation. It was a calculated campaign of plunder, meticulously planned and executed. Resources were confiscated and goods were shipped back to Britain, leaving the colonies stripped of their wealth. This systematic looting ensured that the British economy thrived while the colonies languished in poverty, leaving behind shattered societies and a legacy of pain that echoes to this day. The impact of British colonial rule is still felt in many parts of the world. Communities were devastated, cultures were disrupted, and the scars of colonialism remain. The legacy of pain and suffering is a testament to the true cost of the British Empire's ambition. It is a history that demands to be confronted, not buried under the weight of imperial nostalgia. Modern-day protests and educational exhibits serve as reminders of the past. Confronting this history is essential to understanding the present and ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. The story of the British Empire is not just a tale of conquest and glory, but a sobering reminder of the human cost of ambition and greed. India, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, was a land of immense wealth and cultural richness. Yet for the millions who called it home, it was a land of suffering and exploitation. The British rule was anything but a source of pride for its inhabitants. The local population faced relentless oppression and economic hardship. The East India Company, a corporation with an insatiable appetite for profit, arrived under the guise of trade, but quickly morphed into a ruthless exploiter of Indian resources and labour. They established a monopoly over Indian trade, manipulating local rulers and exploiting the land's riches. Taxes were levied with merciless efficiency, draining India's wealth and funneling it into British coffers. The burden of these taxes fell heavily on the shoulders of the common people, who struggled to make ends meet. Farmers were forced to grow cash crops like indigo and opium, which were highly profitable for the British but detrimental to the local food supply. This left them vulnerable to famine when monsoon rains failed, as they had little to no food crops to fall back on. The consequences were devastating. When the rains did not come, famines swept through the land, claiming countless lives and leaving entire communities destitute. India's once thriving textile industry was systematically dismantled. The British imposed policies that favoured their own manufactured goods, leading to the decline of local industries. The markets were flooded with cheap cloth manufactured in Britain's burgeoning factories, effectively destroying the livelihoods of Indian weavers and artisans. This was not free trade, it was a calculated assault on India's economic independence. The British crafted policies that ensured the colony remained subservient and dependent on its imperial master. The legacy of greed left deep scars on the Indian subcontinent. The exploitation and plunder of resources, the dismantling of local industries, and the imposition of foreign rule created a cycle of poverty and dependency that would take generations to overcome. The story of British rule in India is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of colonialism. The Bengal famine of 1943 stands as a chilling testament to the brutal consequences of British colonial policies. This catastrophic event, which unfolded during the height of World War II, was not merely a natural disaster, but a man-made calamity exacerbated by the decisions and actions of the British government. As a devastating famine gripped Bengal, a region already reeling from wartime shortages, the situation was further aggravated by the colonial administration's prioritization of British interests over the welfare of the local population. The streets of Bengal were filled with the haunting images of emaciated bodies and desperate families struggling to survive amidst the scarcity of food and resources. Then Prime Minister Winston Churchill displayed a callous indifference to the plight of millions of starving Indians. His policies and decisions during this period reflected a deep-seated disregard for the lives of the colonized people. Churchill's focus remained steadfastly on the war effort, often at the expense of the colonies under British rule. Rice, a staple food for Bengalis, was diverted to feed British troops and bolster wartime reserves. This diversion of essential food supplies was a deliberate act that left the local population to fend for themselves in an already dire situation. The British administration's actions were driven by a strategic need to support their military efforts, with little regard for the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Bengal. Leaving the local population to wither and die, the famine's impact was devastating. Markets were empty, and villages were filled with malnourished and dying people. The British government's failure to provide adequate relief measures only worsened the situation, leading to widespread suffering and death. Churchill, when informed of the unfolding tragedy, infamously dismissed the crisis as a problem of their own making, claiming Indians breed like rabbits. His callous remarks and lack of empathy highlighted the deep-seated prejudices and racial biases that influenced British colonial policies. These attitudes contributed to the neglect and mistreatment of the Indian population during one of their darkest hours. The famine, a direct consequence of wartime policies and administrative negligence, claimed the lives of an estimated 3 million people. Mass graves and the sight of countless dead bodies became a grim reality in Bengal. The sheer scale of the tragedy was a stark reminder of the human cost of colonial exploitation and indifference. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of colonial indifference. The suffering endured by the Bengali population during the famine is a testament to the devastating impact of colonial rule and the prioritization of imperial interests over human lives. The Bengal famine remains a poignant example of how political and military strategies can lead to unimaginable human suffering. The Bengal famine was not merely a tragedy, it was a crime against humanity. The deliberate actions and neglect by the British colonial administration led to the deaths of millions, leaving a lasting scar on the history of India. This dark chapter serves as a powerful reminder of the need for accountability and the importance of remembering the past to prevent such atrocities in the future. British colonialism went beyond the economic and political subjugation of India. It sought to dominate and diminish its very soul. Priceless artifacts, cultural treasures that represented the heart and soul of India, were looted from temples, palaces and homes. The Kohinoor diamond, once the pride of the Mughal emperors, became a glittering trophy in the British crown, a symbol of conquest rather than cultural exchange. Museums across Britain, repositories of empire, stand as silent testament to this cultural plunder. Ancient sculptures, intricate textiles and sacred manuscripts are displayed with a sense of detached pride, their historical context often ignored or downplayed. This was not merely theft, it was an attempt to erase India's cultural identity, to rewrite history by claiming ownership of its most prized possessions.